This lesson is using the range attribute with numeric and date data. The objectives for this lesson are to limit numeric data using the range attribute and limit date ranges using the range attribute. The range attribute is used to constrain the values entered between a lower and an upper bound, and you can use it with numeric data or with date data. The easy one is range using numeric data, since you just need to pass in the two parameters, the lower and the upper bound. And obviously you can always do additional error message as well. So if you were to do something like this and the standard cost was not between those ranges, then it would come out with this message: the field standard cost must be between 0.01 and 9999. Let's take a look at limiting numeric values using the range attribute. Locate the standard cost property in the product class, and let's go ahead and add a range attribute here. And you can see in the IntelliSense that we have a double, which is the minimum. So we'll do 0.01, and then a double, which is the maximum. So we'll put in 9,999. And then let's go ahead and do our error message here. So in the error message, I'm going to go ahead and use, of course, my placeholder to say the property name or the display standard cost must be between. Now, this is where I can put in my placeholders, but I can also use the standard formatters that you're used to in strings, such as in the .toString method, where you can use a :C and it will then express it as a currency. So there we go. I'll do that. Let's do this on both the standard cost and on the list price. So if we go back to program.cs, you can see that standard cost right now is set to 0 and list price is set to 0. So if we run this, you can see the standard cost comes out must be between 0.01 and 9,999, but it's expressed as currency. And that's just a nicer message than you would get if you left the error message off, because Microsoft doesn't know if you want it currency or not. So this is where, with a range, you're typically going to want to use your own error message. Next, let's take a look at limiting the date ranges using the range attribute, because we have to do one additional step here in order for it to work with a date data type. Go back to the product class again, and just above the cell start date, we're going to enter another range attribute. But if you look at it now, the first parameter you must pass is you have to tell it what type that we're using. So type of date time, that lets the range class know that the next two parameters, even though they're expressed as strings, need to be converted to date time in order to do the comparison with the value that's in the cell start date property. And then of course we have our error message where we're using the placeholders. And once again, I'm using the standard formatters. I just want a short date format, so I'm using a lowercase d after the 1 and after the 2 placeholders. So if we go back to program.cs, let's make standard cost and list price something valid now. Well, what I have done is I've made sure that the cell start date is, as you can see, it's a date, it's 1/1/1999. Well, that's outside of the range that we had just put in. So when I run this, I get selling start date must be between 1/1/2000 and 12/31/2030. In this lesson, we added the range attribute to set a numeric minimum and maximum value. We also added a range to set a date range. And don't forget, you got to use that type of when you're doing dates. Coming up next, check data using the regular expression annotation.